Okay, we're on the air. It is July 22nd, 2025. This is the study session for the town board of the town of Estes Park. First up, we're talking curbs and gutters. And we have Trevor Whitwer who's going to chat with us about that.
I am so excited for this topic.
Yeah.
I know.
Wow, I wasn't expecting that,
is.
so that's great to hear.
This is a great topic.
Yeah, well, good evening. Thanks for giving me some time to talk about this. I think we're here because we've received some comments from the public over the past few years about projects and the intended future use of installing curb and gutter, specifically concrete curb and gutter on our projects, and whether or not that takes away from the mountainous or rural feel of the town. So as you've heard before, we have about 59 centerline miles of street. That equates to 118 miles of potential curb and gutter. We also have over 12 miles of CDOT highways to maintain, which also would include any curb and gutter and ditch system that would fall to the town to maintain. A few different types of curbs and gutters that we use. There's a catch curb and a spill curb. Catch curb is more common, which is what you'll typically see and specifically put in place for drainage and conveyance of stormwater runoff. A spill curb is an outflow, so it directs the water basically back out into the street. That's more common in steeper terrain where you'll have basically a straight grade coming off the hillside where that water hits the road and then just keeps going across the road. And then we have gutter pans to help convey that runoff across intersections. Typical street section right here, we have that catch curb on the left-hand side with a crown, a high point in the middle of the street. We do have quite a bit of ditch system, obviously, through the town. And then we also have different uses for that curb that isn't just specific to that drainage or conveyance component. So if you imagine, the edge of that roadway jumping straight up with a steep terrain, a lot of times we'll put a curb in those sections to help protect that existing vegetated shoulder from plow damage or erosion. Currently, we have a little bit over 9 miles of concrete curb and gutter, and that's in relation to the 59 centerline miles, so over 18 miles of linear footage of curb and gutter, concrete curb and gutter. So that equates to a little over 16% of our street mileage and about a quarter of our total street network as far as a named street goes currently contains some dimension of concrete curb and gutter. So not entire full width of curb and gutter from one end to the other, but some component of concrete curb. Just this year, we'll be adding concrete curb to Steamer Parkway, and then Matthew Circle will be a full reconstruction, which will get entirely new concrete curb and gutter, which currently has asphalt curb and gutter. Some of the costs associated with this work, what we've been seeing the last few years is about $40 to $45 per foot, and that's with a project over 1,000 feet of linear footage. When we get under that 1,000-foot mark, the prices go up a little bit. Just the efficiency of or the scope of that project, that price goes up. Concrete gutter pan between 4 to 6 feet wide that you'll see at the intersections runs around $70 a foot. And asphalt curb, which we do not put in anymore, which is actually prohibited by code, our estimates have been around $50 per foot that we've received from some of the paving contractors. So you would historically, I guess, asphalt curb has been cheaper until recently. I think a lot of places or a lot of contractors just don't want to go through the hassle of putting in asphalt curb. It's a lot easier to put the concrete in some regards. But there's also additional costs with putting in concrete. So you have extra excavation, putting down that base material. So it equates to about $3 a foot. So overall, price-wise, we're getting a better deal with the concrete. Now, if you look at our entire network, about 50 miles left that are not currently situated with concrete curb and gutter. At an average price of $40 a foot, it would cost $21 million to build out the rest of the town network with concrete curb and gutter. Now, that's not our intent. I just want to illustrate that's what it would look like. We're currently doing about 3,000 feet per year with some of our projects, which would take 170 some years to get the entire town at that rate. So just a few points to illustrate what it looks like if the entire town were to become curb and gutter someday, which is not my intent or Public Works intent at all. Some of our most recent projects, Graves Avenue, 1,700 feet of curb, pretty cheap on that project comparatively to the rest of our projects. That was only 5% of that total project cost. Pine Knoll and Reclamation last year and finishing up earlier this year on 3rd Street, around 3,000 feet of curb at that $40 to $42, 20 to 25% of the project costs, and Matthew Circle is going to be about 35%. So that's going to be about average for these reconstruction projects that we have been doing the last couple of years and will continue to do. What we see in that price difference a lot is the scope of that project. So if we're putting in concrete on a street that we are not replacing the entire depth of that asphalt, it's more there's more labor involved because they have to physically form that with lumber to put that concrete in. So like on Pine Knoll in 2024, complete reconstruct, we took all the pavement out, revamped the base material. They're able to bring in a curb machine, which is extremely efficient. It does over 1,000 feet a day of curb and gutter. So we get a little bit better price when we have a project that we can incorporate that curb machine into. A lot of the maintenance issues that we see currently, we have a lot of asphalt curb around town. That's one data point that I don't have today that we'll continue or start taking inventory on in our inspections moving forward. A quarter of our streets have concrete curb and gutter. I would estimate well over 3/4 of our street probably have some form of asphalt curb right now. So again, it's a drainage conveyance issue first and foremost, but as you can see on that lower left picture, that's kind of more of a physical barrier to hold back that sloped area. Another use that we have with it is a physical barrier to separate vehicles from pedestrians between a trail or a sidewalk. So there's more uses than just the drainage. A lot of times it's edge protection. If we have concrete curb in place, it protects the edge of that asphalt. We see a lot of failure in our asphalt streets on those edges where that material erodes and gets worn down a little bit quicker than the rest of the roadway, and then we get larger chunks of asphalt break off. So we have a larger maintenance cost associated with edge failure where we don't have curb and gutter in place. And a lot of that also comes from snowplow damage as well. So historically, asphalt curbs have been put in with paving projects because it seemed like the quickest, easiest thing to do. A lot of people maybe didn't want to deal with bringing in a separate concrete contractor to install curb and gutter. We're seeing about, at best, 10 years of life out of asphalt curb before it gets to a point where we're having the street crew go out and completely remove 100 feet of asphalt curb that's just laying there. So multiple erosive issues also with that aspect.
What do you think the incidence is of the asphalt without a curb at all? I can think of a lot of streets that are asphalt only, no curb exists.
As far as a percentage of our street network?
Yeah, is that part of the plan? Is that without putting any curb in, a lot of the streets in my neighborhood and areas that I'm familiar with don't have any curb at all?
So we have a lot of streets that have a really good conveyance system in the ditches. Mm-hmm. So if we were to go and reconstruct a street that had no curb and gutter right now, fairly flat, or has a good ditch system in place, we wouldn't put curb and gutter in place. If it has a well-functioning conveyance system in the ditch, and we can continue to maintain that ditch in a good conveyance capacity, we won't put in curb and gutter. And that's not our intent. We don't want to approach every project to put concrete curb and gutter in place.
Okay.
I do want to receive feedback from you all tonight on what you want to see town projects look like moving forward. But our intent is not to have a blanket policy where we're gonna put in curb and gutter on every street project.
Okay, and that answers my other question when you said that it's not your intent to do all the streets with that, so that's helpful. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, appreciate that question.
What would be the life, though, of that paved street without curb and gutter for the edge breakdown versus if you would have had even the asphalt curb and gutter?
Sure.
Because I see a lot of what I see on the picture on the right. So I'm wondering if we're not doing it, but yet the life of our streets aren't being what they should be if they had it.
Sure.
If you could speak to that.
I think there's a lot of variables that would play into that. If we have a fairly flat street that has a good 3 foot, 4 foot shoulder, and then there's a ditch system, and that street was constructed properly with good compaction, good base material. You know, asphalt streets, even a brand new asphalt street's gonna last 20 to 30 years before we need those major structural improvements. I think of Highway 7 comes to mind a lot. You can think of those eroded areas on the shoulder that are 12 to 18 inches deep right now. So it's a lot of maintenance of that shoulder area and that ditch system as well. I think what we've seen on Highway 7 is the runoff hits the edge of that pavement and there's a high spot. The water doesn't actually get out to the ditch. So if we have good maintenance and we're taking a look at our entire network and we know where the problem areas are, we know where there's steep erosive issues already, and we can hit those with maintenance activities to try to prevent that, then we'll have a longer life from that street. So one of the other maintenance issues we see, and one of the bigger reasons why the last phase of Pine Knoll Drive was pushed a year, our original intent going into that project was just a mill and fill, 4-inch removal and repave without curb and gutter. What we found was, as you come from the top of Pine Knoll Drive down towards Highway 7, the water would go into a ditch, maybe go through one driveway culvert, then it would jump back up into the street, then it would drop back down, and we'd have all these erosive issues, plugged driveway culverts. So we'd like to provide that consistent conveyance system from one end to the other to make sure we're not having issues. And a lot of that's going to go in with, if we are maintaining a ditch and we don't have curb and gutter, then we have to look at maintaining those driveway culverts as well, or cross culverts under the street. So curb and gutter alleviates, concrete curb and gutter especially, alleviates a lot of those maintenance issues, takes away from, you know, that sedimentary issue, that erosive issue that we see on most of our streets right now.
I have to ask you if there's any concern about redirecting rainwater or surface water, like it's in front of my yard, just as an example. Perhaps I'm counting on that water. Surface water is part of the plan. So if you're taking everything from the top of Pine Knoll and shooting it down to Highway 7, is there any concern about not using that permeable surface all the way down Pine Knoll to disperse some of the water and focusing it on Highway 7, which will be a problem for me driving home and you know, a lot of potential. I know that there's a grand plan for stormwater management, but are we creating problems as much as we're mitigating problems? Is there any concern about taking that surface water away from property that may have traditionally counted on that for irrigation and part of the growth in the property?
Absolutely, yeah, and we look at that with each project. We had our consultant do a drainage report and take a look at what that current conveyance looked like and where that water was going, and then what it looked like after we put the curb or proposed to put the curb and gutter in. So if it's to a point, especially with a grade like Pine Knoll Drive where it's so steep, that was the first thing I was concerned with and had our consultant look at. We don't want to put all that water in one gutter channel and concentrate it in one discharge point at the highway. So yeah, absolutely, we look at that with every project. Matthews Circle is fairly flat, so we don't really have that issue. There are a few select areas where there's a break in the asphalt curb currently where that water drains to. So we would try to maintain that historic drainage pattern to try to keep that water going where it historically always has.
Okay,
but there are going to be times where we can't do that.
Okay, thanks.
Absolutely.
So I'm on Pine Knoll, and I can tell you that some of the pools at the bottom of my driveway, so I take care of half of that water. But it's much better, the road is much better.
Okay.
There's certain places in the road that do have pools of water that don't keep draining, but maybe that helps that problem actually, so.
That's all I really have, but I'm open to questions and comments.
So there's a significant amount of ditch or culvert drainage systems throughout the town based on the numbers I think that you've got here. Personally, I don't see a reason for a de facto curb and gutter with every project, with every mitigation project, with every new build-out. I think it should be weighed for the area, the history, all of the things that you've been talking about, but it shouldn't just be a reflex to go curb and gutter. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm following up with that. I agree with that, by the way. I like the fact that you take a measured approach for where you need it, where you really don't. How do we do it on development projects? Because we're talking right now about town streets. And if we have to, if we come up with a traffic study that says you have to improve an intersection, you know, you're usually talking about a fairly high use area that it's hard to imagine you wouldn't always want curb and gutter on that just because of the extent of the use. But maybe that's not true. Is there a different approach taken with development projects?
So the current development code requires that all new subdivision developments that are incorporating a new roadway install curb and gutter.
Okay, so it's already required right now.
Yes, and historically, it hasn't always been enforced. So, speaking with Greg, who's been here for over 10 years, he thinks roughly about 10 years ago is when it really got to be enforced. Prior to that, it may not have been
So
enforced.
Greg was the enforcer.
Greg started it, yeah.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And then, do you think this history of how much of a project it is pretty representative of past projects? I mean, you have those four where it looks like it goes from 5% to 35% of the project cost. And I presume a lot of those projects are funded by various grants. You know, maybe the town has to kick in money as well, but there may be grants. Are there grant requirements for this at all that you've run into?
No, so out of those list of projects, Graves Avenue was the only grant-funded project.
Oh, okay.
There wouldn't have been a curb and gutter requirement because it's an off-system, it's a local street. If we had a grant that improved Moraine Avenue, that might be a different story.
That might be a difference.
Yeah, but since it's a local on-street, off-system street,
They don't care
AKA
as
the
much.
town street, we didn't have to follow that.
Thank you.
So, of course, CDOT takes care of their roads, but if we are needing, if there's issues on that state road, with curb and gutter or what have you, they don't do any of that. That's the town's issues?
There's a state statute that basically says CDOT is responsible from the edge of pavement to the edge of pavement. Anything outside of that is the local jurisdiction. So if there's a curb and gutter, the town is responsible. The shoulders, the ditches, any stormwater infrastructure, inlets, culverts, pipes, the town is responsible for maintaining those.
So let's say that the town would like to have a larger shoulder on, let's just say 36 or whatever. Is that, if we're responsible for the shoulder and we want it larger than what CDOT is doing,
Sure.
is that possible?
Could we do that? Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
We would go through the same process any developer would if they had frontage on a state highway. We would have to submit for either an access permit or a special use permit. So if we proposed installing curb and gutter for whatever reason, it would go through that permit process and CDOT would review it. I don't see any scenario where they wouldn't allow that, but a good example would be the redesign of the trails along Highway 7 and Highway 34. There are going to be some sections where along Highway 34 we will have a curb on the backside of the trail. And that'll be part of CDOT's review, but I don't see any issues with that being denied.
Okay,
So.
thanks.
Yeah.
So are we responsible for the culverts like under Moraine, like out by the transfer station where where it protects the highway?
We are,
We have to flush those culverts and keep them clean?
yes.
So that's like town right-of-way in
No,
those
it's state
areas?
highway.
CDOT right of way, but town responsibility, town maintenance.
Interesting. I do want to mention, I'm really glad we're not doing the asphalt ones. They may be a little cheaper, but I can tell you, at least in my neighborhood and other places I go, it seems like every place, they fall apart. They got big hunks of asphalt laying out in the road. They don't seem very functional. And I would guess probably life cycle costing, they're probably the most expensive we have.
Yes.
Cheap to put in, and then, but then they fall apart in big chunks of asphalt, and usually in the bike lane. So I'm glad we're not doing that anymore.
Yeah, and we have been receiving quite a few complaints about broken asphalt in certain areas, and unfortunately, the response is that we don't replace asphalt curb. So we'll go remove it if it's in the roadway, but we won't replace it.
Yeah, I think in my neighborhood, you took it out, and that's better than fixing it, is just
Yeah.
take it out and get it out of there.
Just curious, how long ago was it that the change was made to ban the asphalt curbs?
It's in the development code, so.
Oh, 20 plus years ago.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's just been an enforcement issue.
Other questions for Trevor? I think we're good. Did we give you the insight you needed?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, all right.
Thank
Thanks
you.
much.
Thank you.
We actually will be breaking here to grab dinner, and so we will suspend the broadcast for 10 minutes, is what it looks like on the schedule. So we will resume at 5:30. Okay, we're back online. The study session is resumed for July 22nd, 2025. And we have Jackie going to talk to us in a cast of a few about the future of Estes Park's water system service area population and demands. Heavy topic.
Yeah, and long title. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you guys. The last master plan was done in 2015, and that's the last time we looked at population and demand projections for our water service area. One distinction is, there's so many different boundaries when we talk about the town boundary, and then the water service area boundary, and then there's the R3 district boundary, and then so this is for the water system service area boundary. So you'll hear numbers and go, that's not the number I'm used to, but that's because, keep in mind, it's town plus little areas on the edges. So 10 years ago was the master plan. A lot's changed since the last demand and population projections. We had a COVID, we had timed entry at the national park, we have lots of changes. So it's a good idea, especially when we're looking at large capital investments like a new plant, to make sure that we're sizing it correctly. Even one MGD too big is a lot of money we spent, and too small means we can't meet our level of service. So we really want to get a good understanding of the projections. They are projections, but we still want to get a good knowledge of where we are now and where we think we will be in 20 years. So we had a lot of stuff happen, and to help us understand all of this, we hired Harvey Economics, and they're an economics firm, to take a look at demand and population projections and look at growth and different elements and all kinds of data sources and so forth. We asked them specifically to look at short-term rentals and ADUs, year-round and seasonal residents, number of residents per connection, post-COVID work patterns, conservation, including our own leak detection program. We have a leak detection program. We fix them when we find them. Has that made a difference? Visitation and habits of people who come in, especially the influence of timed entry. And then visitor trends in the park, festivals, and things like that, and what they do maybe to our water demand. Let me tell you a little bit about Harvey Economics. They specialize in forecasting, impact analysis, and feasibility studies. It's a firm that was founded by Ed Harvey in 2002, and he's built his career around water, mineral, energy, and environmental resource studies and community changes in the Western U.S. He's done impact studies, analysis of future resource demands, economic ramifications of drought, resource value and marketing, and benefit and cost of regulations. And then Ed is also joined by Susan Walker, who's a partner and director at Harvey Economics, and they focus on economic consulting. She's done demographics and forecasting. That's kind of why she's leading this project, because that's her specialty. Socioeconomic impacts, cost-benefit analysis, economic modeling, and feasibility assessments. The presentation's got a lot of data, so it's a little dry sometimes because there's a lot of data, but they have it split into sections. So if you have questions on things, great. If you wait till the end of the section, it might be good to ask it within the sections versus stopping in the middle of a slide. That might be something next. So they're broken by color code. So as you get to the end of a color-coded section, you go, okay, now let's ask questions about that data and where it came from. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Harvey Economics and Ed and Susan and let them fascinate you guys with all the research that they did on demographics and demand projections.
Thanks. Welcome, Ed and Susan. I think the biggest challenge is the crinkle fest that we're having up here.
Yeah.
And
Well-
so as long as you speak over that, we're all good.
That and the hunger pangs are the other issue. Anyway, thank you for having us up here. We're delighted to be up here, getting out of the heat. And I'm trying to figure out whether it's sort of a battle between curb and gutter and an economist. I don't know what is more dull, but hopefully this subject, and one of the reasons we wanted to talk to you folks about it is, it's one thing to be sizing infrastructure, but the population projections that we're going to be talking about, we think will be interesting to you. We hope it will be. And we think that this may have some applicability to other planning issues and other things that you're going to be facing over time. So we're hoping that this will have a benefit in that way. Let me see if I can get this to work. I think, there we go. What we'll go through this presentation, but if there is a question that you've got and you feel like you just can't go on, raise your hand, push the button, we'll be glad to answer it. Keep it kind of informal, and that'll make it more fun. Anyway, we'll start off by talking about the purpose of our work and why in the heck we're here. I think that's kind of important. We'll give you an overview of the information sources that we drew upon to develop these population projections. Frankly, this is a small town, but frankly, it's a complicated town. There are a whole lot of influences on different population groups of people coming in and coming out, and each one of those groups has different effects and things that are driving it. So I think that's probably why Jackie and Ruben wanted us to help with this, and we want to talk to you about some of those tonight. And we think hopefully this will be interesting, at least in a geeky sort of way. So we'll see. Now, the stated purpose of this work was to develop projections to plan infrastructure. As Jackie said, mistakes can be expensive on the high side and on the low side. And so, especially when you're doing long-term projections, you try to do the best job you can, and that's what we've attempted here. So we'll focus on that, and with your input, we hopefully will get there. We're looking at a 20-year forecast period, so we'll be looking out to 2045. And as Jackie indicated, we're talking about the water service area, which includes the town plus certain areas outside the town. So that's really going to be the focus of our discussion tonight. Here is the surface area. As you see here, I think you all are familiar with this. We will, in preparing these population projections, we looked at a whole bunch of different influences. The effect of seasonal residents. To what extent are seasonal residents coming in and becoming a larger element of your population here? We looked at ADUs, workforce housing, and the extent that that's affecting things. The commuting and the remote working, all of these different influences, we examined each one of them in developing these population and water demand projections. We'll be talking about each one of them as we go along. To do this work, we had to access a whole bunch of local data sources. And Susan and Kay interviewed so many people within the town of Estes Park, certain within utilities, but also community development, the housing authority, Visit Estes Park. We also were ultimately able to interview folks at the National Park Service. We also used information from the Department of Transportation, especially traffic volume projections, projections that the state has for our region and for the state, and basically accessing this information that we could to bring to bear on these projections. So now what we're going to do, and I'm just teeing this up for Susan, is we're going to be talking about different, we call them population categories, but really these are groups of humans coming here in the town of Estes Park, consuming your water, really is what, and so we're going to be talking about each one of these different groups, and we'll go through them one by one carefully. Susan, I think you're ready to take over here.
Good evening. And when Ed says we'll go through them one by one, he is correct, but we will not be here all night, I promise you that. But we had those 4 different categories of population, sort of different groups, and we will go through those individually. The one thing I do want to point out is that we developed a high growth scenario and a low growth scenario. So we don't have a single set of projections going forward saying
this is where we're definitely going to land in 2045, but we've got this sort of upper end and a lower end range where we believe that it is likely to be somewhere in the middle of this range. It's a small enough range that we're confident to say that these projections are going to fall somewhere within that range. The higher growth scenario, I'll just say, is sort of, you could think of as a kind of a status quo in terms of percentage growth scenario. We looked at historic trends and continue those going forward. The lower growth scenario reflects some information that we have in terms of slower growth trends in different population categories. And so we'll see that range throughout these different sections. Okay, Jackie, I'm going to hope this is perfect. Okay, thank you. So the first one is the year-round and seasonal residents. So this is a breakdown of folks who are here permanently, year-round, versus those who have possibly a second home. They come up, they own a property, but they're not residents of the town of Estes Park. There are a lot of numbers on this slide, and I'm going to point out a couple of particular things. Between 2018 and 2024, we've got about a little bit less than a 1% per year growth in the service area population. So that's one thing that I'd like to point out there. And you will see a negative number up there. Those ones that are labeled resident, those are the year-round residents. In town are located within the town boundaries, out of town are outside the town boundaries, but still within the water service area. The population of year-round residents we have seen decreasing over time, while the population of the seasonal residents have increased. And historically, the vacancy rates in Estes Park and the water service area have grown over time. I have in one of the notes down there that in 2015, the vacancy rate was 25%. Over time, that's grown. We're at about 37% now in 2024. So we see that shifting of the demographics in terms of the proportion of year-round residents versus seasonal residents as a historic trend. We gathered information from a number of sources, as Ed discussed. This is data, historical data on building permits. And so the takeaway here is that there's certainly growth occurring within the water service area. It's not a huge amount of growth. There are a bunch of new residential and commercial structures. There are a lot of remodels and additions. Those remodels and additions are sort of could increase or decrease water demands in terms of whether there's an extra bathroom included, or maybe a remodel includes more newer high-efficiency fixtures, so there's a little bit of an offset there. But the takeaway here is that there has been growth activity, not a large amount of growth activity, but it is occurring. In terms of future development, and these are numbers for, on the left-hand side, for the town of Estes Park in terms of future number of units. So I'll point out that these numbers you see in that table are numbers of units. Now, they are in progress. Some of them are in progress. Some of them have not started. The ones in the possible line are off in the distant part of the future, but there is, growth on the horizon, some redevelopment on the horizon of existing properties, so a mix of new buildings and redeveloped buildings. I put some information in there on undeveloped acreage within the town and within the service area as a whole. Some of those acres are limited by access. There are restrictions on some types of subdivisions outside of the town boundaries, but there is acreage still to be developed within, the next 20 years that we're looking at here. And these are the projections for the year-round and seasonal residents. So we've got, again, the high growth scenario on the left-hand side and the lower growth scenario on the right-hand side. So we're looking at a population increase of anywhere between about 2,200 and 3,000 people by 2045. Again, it's a mix of the changes in the year-round population and that seasonal population. One thing I will point out here is that we have assumed the continuation of increasing vacancy rates over time. As I said, in 2015, it was 25%, and that has been growing over time. We've assumed by 2045 that Estes Park gets to a 50% vacancy rate. Again, right now, we're at about 37%, so we've extended that going forward. So that is an underlying assumption of these population projections. Yes, I will stop here. That's the first segment of our population projections. It's a big piece of it.
Well, when I see the numbers, the low and the high, I immediately feel a little bit better. I wondered what you were going to come back with. We've been in the last 20 years or 25 years passed by so many, and it's not a bad thing, so many front range towns that have exploded in growth because, well, they don't have the limits that we have up here. We're in this fixed cradle of space, whether it's the unincorporated areas or the town limit. So I am not shocked by either the low or the high in that regard, but clarify vacancy for me.
Right, so the vacant units, it could be vacant for any number of reasons. Now, the large percentage of vacant units, when I refer to vacancy units, the Census Bureau definition of vacant units, there are a number of them, but the large portion for Estes Park are seasonal, for seasonal, recreational, and part-time use. So that doesn't really describe just units that happen to be vacant because they're for sale or because they're for rent, but it is defined as a seasonal, recreational, or part-time use.
So we add to the population, but they're not here most of the time.
Sometimes, yes, they're here part-time, and
Mayor and
That's one of
Susan,
the big takeaways, I would say, when Susan and I were
You'd want to speak into the microphone.
well, I'll share with you.
Thank you so much. That's one of the takeaways that we had here, which was really interesting, is this emergence of seasonal population as a proportion of your total population. And what we're looking at is, we're not looking at a Vail situation, we're not looking at where they're taking over. We're looking at, in essence, a balance here of year-round population with seasonal population. But they're gonna become a bigger influence in your total housing stock, and that'll have an influence on water use, and I suspect a number of other public service issues. So we're seeing that as a clear trend here, and that's something to take note of. So pretty flat and it's very slow growth for the year-round population, a much more substantial growth for the seasonal population component. So.
Mayor, if I could just jump in, hopefully help clarify that as well, just glom onto the answer about vacancies. It's something we've been working on at the Colorado Association of Ski Towns. So it's essentially a home where someone's not living in it full time. And that can be because they only come here seasonally, it could be because it's a short-term rental. But what we've seen across the resort communities is that those rates are rising, and they're pretty high. So 20-something% here, 30-something% at the moment. And I've seen figures in the Estes Valley from the census data that it's up over 40% if you include the whole valley. And so it's interesting to hear you say that you're looking at those rates continuing to increase.
But
Yeah.
as far as vacancy, then a specific dwelling unit, what threshold does it have to be vacant to be counted as vacant?
Well, I'll look to our data folks here, but as I've tried to dig into that, it seems like the definition that the Census Bureau really uses primarily is anyone living in the home when they come knock on the door or check on that particular unit, which can be translated into, is someone living there most of the time or not?
Thanks.
It's really interesting information, that shift that you're describing, and I wonder what the impact is on water use. You brought up fixtures and you brought up numbers of people, and vacancies are rising, but seasonal folks are increasing. So do seasonal people use more water than permanent residents? I don't think they do. I would suggest, and I would believe that a person is a certain amount of water that's used versus a fixture or, so I'm curious about how you quantify the use of water related to these very interesting shifts in things that will have an impact on our housing, our childcare, our school enrollment, our town, our services. This is pretty interesting, so I wonder what that correlation is.
Well, you're right, and we did look at that because we talked about that a lot in terms of residential water use as a category. How is that going to change, or a per account water use going to change with that increase in the seasonal population? We did make an adjustment on that, which I'm going to talk about in the second part
Okay.
when we get to the water demands. So we were thinking along the same lines.
But, bottom line, it's gonna diminish total water use. Because there will be. Can't hear you. Oh, sorry. There will be times when people are not gonna be here, so in terms of the total water use per account, it's gonna diminish that. So, it'll also have a more complicated effect as well in terms of conservation and how they use water. Because if you're a year-round resident, you may have more sensitivity to our lack of water in this region, and if you come here just occasionally, you may not be as sensitive to those conservation-related issues. So there's a difference. It's a different group, right?
I'll wait till, because I am concerned with that seasonal versus year-round. So I'll wait till after that presentation for my
Okay,
question.
you could pepper me with questions at about slide 24.
So I was talking to somebody that says, it's a much better measure of visitation to look at the flush rate than it is the sales tax collections. Which I imagine is true because you have inflation and other things going into that. But so water can have a lot to do with how busy we are as a community too. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. I had a specific question because I'm very interested in workforce housing issues and childcare. And as I'm sure you know, a few years back, we passed this Initiative 6C to provide $5 million a year, which is a lot for this community, although it doesn't go as far as you'd think by any means. And part of the hope of that was to get more people living here full-time, and particularly families, so that the school system is supported. And I don't know if there's any way to project that impact, and it's probably not near as significant as some of these other factors, but we had a Fall River Village that was converted from a vacation rental facility to workforce housing. Now, it's not all filled yet, but it will be. It's like 90 units, so it's significant. And I'd like to understand if there's any way to I guess we can measure it going forward in terms of the census data, but is there any data out there that enables you to predict what's an impact like that might have?
Well, we're going to look at projections of commuting workers as one of our population segments, and so we can have a more extensive discussion there too. But we did talk to the workforce, the housing authority folks about workforce housing, and we had a very detailed conversation with them about that converted housing and what their future sort of hopes were for additional workforce housing down the line. There are a couple of sort of background additional information slides at the very end of this presentation. One of them is on the workforce housing issue. And it's interesting because you're right, it was about 90 or 100 units or 100 plus units that they have developed in recent years. And they are conversions of existing facilities. And so when we talked with those folks, it's not that it's not new demand, but it's a conversion. It's not a new account, right? It's not a new account for utilities. It's a conversion of that. Now, for some of those conversions. They do put in new high-efficiency fixtures and some of those things. Some of them were good enough that they just left as they were because that was less expensive. They worked, they were maintained. So there are nuances into what the effects are in terms of.
I know you're
yeah.
all about the water usage, and my
Yeah.
interest is more
On the
developing a
population
community
side,
that
yeah.
is really living here.
Yeah.
And, you know, so it is my hope that as this comes to pass, we do better on the year-round population than your projections, because if we don't, we're not being successful with our workforce housing initiatives.
Yeah. And I know they have a lot of plans. They have a lot of
of
hopes and
plans.
dreams. I think you're right. I think they have spent a lot of the money that has been collected in that fund so far. I know it's just a recent, in the last several years, fund, but they have a lot of hopes and dreams. The timing of some of that is really uncertain as to what they are going to be able to do within this 20-year time frame. They do have, I can't remember what the exact number was, but several dozen new units that they're hoping to complete within the next 5 years, sort of the short-term time period. And beyond that, they hope to be able to continue that growth. But in terms of the exact timing and the scale of that, I think
Yeah,
there's
it
some
takes forever.
uncertainty.
It takes a long
Yeah.
period of time, for sure, but
Yeah, and the breadth of the information is a wonderful thing, and we'll likely use it in a lot of different ways going forward. And now, back to water.
Well, before we get to water, we have 3 more population segments. Did you want to say anything else? But okay. All right. So the transient population, these are the day and the overnight visitors. And I'm going to skip through to some of the major pieces here. Obviously, the existence of Rocky Mountain National Park is a huge influence on visitation to Estes Park, whether it's just for the day or it's overnight. I threw up some historical information on visitor days. This comes from the national park itself and also peak month and low month. 2019 was a very high year. I just will throw out that the park's staff have really been, as you probably all know, grappling with how to manage visitors for a long time. And we want to have visitor safety. We want to preserve the resource. We want to make sure everyone has a quality experience when they're there at the park. And so they've been working on visitor management for many years. They have a day use visitor access plan that incorporates now a pretty specific timed entry system that the park staff is comfortable with. They feel that is going to be in place for the long term. And so they have let us know that they are anticipating sort of a stable sort of 4.1-ish million visitors per year. That's where they would like to manage visitation on an annual basis. And so going forward, they don't anticipate seeing the highs of 2019. Obviously, there's some fluctuation from year to year, but this is where they'd like to land going forward. Obviously, in addition to visitation to just the national park, you've got people visiting Estes Park as a destination. Most people visit the park. Not all people visit the park, that's for sure. So we have 2 different sets of information about visitors to Estes Park. And one of them comes from a well-known as the Dean Runyon Group. They do tourism and visitation studies across the United States, and they had some data in there on visitor days that I, again, threw up that same historical period. They've got them generally hovering around 4 million visitor days per year over the last several years. And I just want to point out that it's sort of, aside from the number, it's a relatively stable number over those years. Now, when we talk to the Visit Estes Park folks, they have this great technology, a software technology, which, you know, I also feel like is a little bit of scary technology. It's based on cell phone data. So, you know, they track folks through, now, and it's not Visit Estes Park that's doing the tracking. There's a company that does the tracking. But through people's cell phone use, they can tell who is a visitor, who is a resident, who works here, who doesn't. And I'm not an engineer, so I don't know all the details of that software, but, you know, versus where folks have have their residence versus where they're spending a few days. They can sort of tease apart different segments of the visitor groups. And so they had given us data for 2023 specifically that showed 6.1 million visitor days, a higher number than the Dean Runyon folks. However, there is historical data available from that Placer AI software. They have been sort of overwhelmed and swamped with work and haven't been able to provide us that yet. We're still continuing that conversation with the Visit Estes Park folks to get that longer period of historical data based on the cell phone
And
use.
I believe they have to have the app downloaded, so it's not really a scientific sample necessarily.
Yes, right, and I don't know all the nuances of
Right.
exactly how that works, but.
Just to clarify, the Placer AI data in particular, there's no app or anything, it just tracks it geotags
Okay.
your phone, so that should cover it for Placer. Yeah, you don't download an app or anything. It just geofences.
They just know who you are and where
Yeah.
you are, and, right.
Yeah. There may be other tracking for different visitor engagement and surveys and things like that where there is, but Placer is just for folks who are in the destination.
Okay, thank you for
Yeah,
clarifying that.
thanks. Thanks for that.
And so that's, the stable pattern of growth from the Dean Runyon folks and sort of the hopefully stable visitation to park is not to say that there's not going to be any growth in visitation to Estes Park going forward. What we see here are projections, population projections for different regions of the state. Growth in the northern part of the Front Range, growth in the Denver metro area certainly influence visitation to Estes Park. On the bottom, we've got CDOT traffic projections through 2045. So there is growth, obviously, in population across the state of Colorado. There are other reasons that folks are going to be coming to Estes Park to visit. Certainly, the Visit Estes Park folks are doing a lot of work to attract visitors during the shoulder seasons. As we know, Boulder now has the Sundance Film Festival that will be coming in a few years. I'm sure there are folks that will be coming up from Boulder to visit Rocky Mountain National Park and Estes Park. So there still is, growth on the horizon for those day and overnight visitors. And so we've got, again, our high and low growth scenarios. We have that 1.4% annual growth. That's based on a Colorado water plan scenario of future population growth for the state with a hotter climate. It's a higher population growth for the state of Colorado because of our climate. And on the lower end, we've got a 1% growth rate. So certainly more visitation to Estes Park over time.
Let me point
something
Let me point something out here. This is really sort of interesting to look at that history of the park visitations. The park is making a concerted effort to kind of control entry and can kind of control visitation. But what we're seeing is that there's going to be other pressures toward visitation. And that pressure will come from population growth along the Front Range and in Colorado. There are indications that the traffic will increase in this area. So there's others who believe that there will be more pressure for visitation in Estes Park and probably in the park as well. Don't know how that's going to work out with the park, but anyway, the pressure will be there. So that's another thing to keep in mind going forward.
The non-transient population, now here's our commuters. So these are folks who are commuting into Estes Park. So they are living in other places outside of the water service area, commuting into the service area for work. And one of those slides in sort of the appendix has historical information. But what we've seen, the Census Bureau collects very detailed commuter data across the country. And so we've got information from going from 2002 to 2024 in terms of trends of commuting workers. And what we've seen in that data is year over year an increase in the number of folks that are commuting into the Estes Park area for work. And so On the higher end, we have this 2% growth rate. That reflects the historic annual commuter growth rate over that longer period of time. On the lower end, it's a growth rate based on the employment growth rate, the number of jobs in Estes Park. I guess I'll make a couple of comments on the commuters' side. We've, again, as I said, we've seen increasing number of commuters coming in for work. You know, I think we agree that that's likely to continue for some of the demographic reasons as well. We've got these seasonal homeowners that are an increasing percentage of the population, a smaller part of year-round folks, an aging population in Estes Park. We talked a little bit about workforce housing in terms of there has been some increase in the available work housing, but not at the scale of the growth of jobs. And so we're going to still continue to see a lot of folks coming in from living in other areas.
Did you look at people commuting out?
We do have that data. Yes, the Census Bureau, as I said, is very detailed. So we've got information on people commuting in and commuting out. I don't have any numbers on the top of my head.
I just
Do you
wonder,
have
because that would change the resources. At least 8 hours a day, they're somewhere else
Yes,
using water,
and
using
they're-
resources, and not here in town.
Well, you're right. That's a good point, because there are certainly folks that, you know, live in Estes Park and commute out to other places too. It's a smaller piece, but I can't tell you off the top of my head how that breaks down.
Folks up here or around have heard me talk about the evolution of transportation. I do think that, I hope that in 20 years, that there has been also a dramatic increase in the ability to have high-speed, frequent microtransit or mass transit up and down the hill, thereby leading, for people who can't afford to live up here, a greater opportunity to live down the hill and commute. So there may be that factor if we see a progression of transportation, or it might take 100 years. I'm not sure.
Well, you're right. I mean, this is one of those things that you mentioned in terms of an extending outside of water demands. That's an awful lot of traffic to have going up and down 36 and 34 and coming in as well. So,
I would mention this, that the commercial base, one of the reasons you see these increases in the workers and you see this commuting, your commercial base is pretty healthy. And you saw the building permits and the new hotel rooms that are being planned and so forth. That's a healthy segment of the population that we're seeing that grow here. So, and then that's going to, of course, the demand for more workers and so forth. So it will bring that in, and that, that's a relatively powerful force, having those jobs available for folks. So.
Have we broken Jackie's rule a little too much and interrupted you in the segments? Because we've got about 25 minutes. So.
no, this is perfect. You can interrupt as often as anybody would like. Special accounts is a very short one. So this is, these are accounts that are served by a master meter for utilities, and so there's a very small number of them. They serve a small number of homes. There's also a very small amount of growth. This is one place where we don't have a high and low growth scenario. We have information about what that build out is going to look like for some of these folks, and so, and it's a very small piece of the overall population and water demands. There's a lot of numbers on this slide too. The takeaway is that we're looking at somewhere between a 0.9 and a 1.2%. That's an average annual growth through 2045 between a high and low growth scenario. Now that's a peak day. Those numbers there in the very right-hand column are peak day numbers. But, with the potential for the utility to be serving somewhere between, 36,000 and 39,000 people on a very peak day. Now, that's all your year-round residents and all your seasonal residents and all your visitors. But that's the sort of range of growth rates that we're looking for in terms of population, somewhere around 1%-ish per year, which is similar to what we've seen in the past. Now, that is the end of population. So if anyone had any other questions specific to population.
We've mostly asked along the way, but we might have one or two others.
So, these numbers reflect my concern for the year-round resident versus the seasonal. And how that's going to affect rates and our water rates and things like that. Because, we knew we had a large amount of homes that aren't being lived in year-round and the impact that is on the community. And my concern is the impact it's going to make on utility rates. And I don't know if you can speak to that. And
Yeah, we are getting ready to do a utility rate study, and all this information feeds into, it's perfect timing because it feeds into the master plan, it feeds into sizing the plant, and it also feeds into looking at our future rates.
Okay.
So this will help steer that. And as Jason Fredericks is here, he's going to be coming back with that scope and contract at some point to say, we need a rate study, and you guys will hear us sharing the results of that rate study, which incorporate all this type of information. It's something we needed to know for that rate study anyway.
yeah, I'm just, how we can think out of the box for those rate tiers, for those people that aren't here but yet own a home and then only use the assets that we have in town when they're in town.
Yeah, and we have to size the infrastructure, whether they're here for a day or, year round. The infrastructure sized as if they're here. So that makes that looping stuff, we talk about the tree all the time and the looping, keeping the water moving, planning for those low flow times as well as those high flow times. I think Ed or Susan hit it in the beginning, we've got for a small town, we have a pretty complicated system with dynamic shifts in population and dynamic shifts in demand from our low January, February time to our June, July time. And that makes a big difference for how we look at our infrastructure and our rates.
Right, but the cost, if they aren't going to be using the water to help provide income for the utility, that can get off balance. Is my concern. Thanks.
And that's a very valid concern. Looking at other communities, that is an issue that you've really got to deal with because the costs are there, and they just as if they were there full time. And so, from a capacity standpoint, from a capital investment standpoint, debt service and all the rest of it, all of that has to be there for the peak population. All right. So, and if you're going to have this seasonal population growing, it's time to be thinking about this now as to how you're going to set the rates where you can accommodate those in a way that be as equitable for the year-round residents as well as the seasonal residents. So right, that's a good, excellent point.
So I'm going to move on now to the water demand projections. Now, it is certainly as important, but a little bit less complicated, these next couple of slides. So what we've done is we've used the information that we have developed on the population, the projections, the growth for these different sectors, and use that information to inform growth in the utilities customer accounts. So the customer accounts, they're residential in town and outside of town, commercial inside and outside of town. There's bulk accounts, and there's some other different types of water demands that the utility faces. And so we've used those growth projections to inform the growth rates of the customer accounts. Then on top of that, what we do is apply a per account water use, an annual per account water use to those account projections. Add in those additional pieces. For example, there's the dispenser station, the demand that is associated with that, and the bleeders, which are operational flushing of the system and other activities that the utility undertakes. We've applied a distribution loss of 20% based on some historical loss audits, a treatment loss of 2%, and then a peaking factor, which reflects the difference between an average day and a peak day. to the water demands. And again, we're looking at a higher growth scenario and lower growth scenario for those demands. And so what this slide shows are the projected customer accounts. So here we've got between a low growth and a high growth scenario, a 1.2% on the high end, a 0.7% on the lower end. Again, the population growth rates are not exactly equivalent to the account growth rate, so there's a little bit wider of a range in this case. But again, hovering between the 0.7 and the 1.2 in terms of various utility account growth in these various sectors. We've got the YMCA in there as well as a customer. And so here it comes back to your question about the per account water use for the residential folks. And so we have information on that top line about the average annual water use for these different utility customer categories, and then the assumptions that we've used through this 20-year projection period. And so the urban and the rural residential sectors, we have decreased that water use. Again, that reflects the increasing percentage of the seasonal folks. And so we've got an increasing percentage of seasonal folks. They're there part-time. I had assumed that they were there half-time over the course of a year. And so looking at sort of a use per account, use per person per day over the historical period, and then adjusting that for that change in proportion of the vacancy rates results in a small decrease of the annual per account water use on the residential side. Now on the commercial side, you can see I've just, we applied the historical average use per account. We kept that stable throughout the projection period. I think there are some reasons why you could say it could be a little more, it could be a little less. There are some factors that might offset things. For example, if visitation is increasing in the shoulder season, you might see some increase in the per customer accounts. That could be offset partially by some of the conversions and the retrofits and the more high-efficiency plumbing fixtures. So because there are different factors that may adjust up or down, I left that as at the historical account growth rates. And then historically, the bleeders have been about 19 million gallons per year, and so we kept that there. The YMCA, I'll point out, we talked with those folks. They are doing some cabin conversions. They're doing a lot of conversions on their property. They're not expecting to increase their bed capacity at all, so they're very comfortable with their 50 million gallons per year based on the last couple of years. You might want to talk about this one. Before we get to the bottom line, the final slide of what the water demand projections are, you may remember way back at the beginning when Ed talked about the whole long list of various factors that we looked at. And we talked a lot about growth and development, but there were a number of other factors on that list that we did examine, and essentially the takeaway is some of them might increase demands a little, some of them might decrease demands a little bit. They're sort of offsetting and kind of in the noise.
One of the very fascinating things about this study for us is I have this visual of waters that are kind of going like this, and you have these waters, but underneath you've got these currents, and the currents are the influences on water demand, and they're going in different directions, and there are a lot of them. For instance, related to conservation. As remodeling takes place and as new development takes place, there's a significant difference in the amount of water use per appliance. It really saves a considerable amount of water over a period of time, so that tends to decrease water use. On the other hand, in this community, unlike others, the conservation typically is directed mostly to outdoor demand. You don't have that much outdoor demand. There's not that much lawn watering here. So the whole ethic and discussion about conservation, and when you have your constituents ask you about it, in fact, in this community, besides what you can do indoor, there's not that much you can do outdoors. So You certainly can take steps, but you just can't move the needle that much. Seasonal residents, as we've talked about, might be less responsive. On climate change, there's another interesting one. People talk about climate change and how that's going to affect water demand. Now, will, and we believe will have an important effect on water supply, but on demand, that really has to do with outdoor water use. Again, you guys don't use that much outdoor water use. So climate change in terms on the demand side, we don't think that's going to have that much effect here. Will in other places? Won't here. The remote work issue certainly came up in COVID, became a big deal. We're seeing that our view of this, and having kind of researched this, is that's kind of stabilized. We don't see a big increase in remote working. There's going to be pressure for some folks to get back to work. There'll be some who will still continue to remote work, but overall, again, that we don't see that moving the needle here very much. So I don't think that's going to be as big of an influence. The ADUs, you may have had some of your constituents raising issues about, well, what about ADUs? Is there going to be a development of a lot of those? There's been some, but there really hasn't been that much. So it has been an opportunity, and we're sort of doubtful that will also move the needle. You're going to have some, but it's just not going to be, it's not going to affect water use particularly very much in our view. So we want to throw out our views on these different influences. People are going to ask you questions about this over time, and your constituents. Here's our view, having studied this and thought about this, and from what we've learned from other communities. So long-winded answer, Susan.
No, I like that answer. All right, and here is the piece de resistance. Again, we've got the higher scenario and the lower scenario, and I will just bring you down to those bottom two tables on each side. Those are the total water demands, including that 20% distribution loss and the 2% treatment loss, total annual demand, and then average day and peak day demand. And again, that peak day demand reflects that 1.95 peaking factor, which we've seen in the historical data as well. And so really it's a relatively small range here, looking from the higher growth to the lower growth. If we're looking at average day demand, 2.1 versus 1.9 MGD, a peak day of 4.2 versus 3.8. Ed and I believe that it's going to fall in there somewhere. My opinion from all of the research and information that I've got would say maybe 3.94, really kind of right in the middle there. I think it will tend to be closer to the lower end than the higher end, but we feel very comfortable with this range given the information that we've gathered over the last 9 months. I will just quickly go over the caveats, and then we can come back to questions on water demands. Projections are uncertain. We gathered a lot of information from a lot of different people. We gathered our arms around it. We talked to a lot of folks who had their, professional opinions. We incorporated all of it and mulled it over and discussed it and put our professional experience and opinion on top of that. But 20 years is a long time, and things could come up in 20 years. If we look at the last 20 years, there were unexpected things that happened in there. But this is our best estimate of projections based on the information that we have as of today. I will just say one thing, and then we will come back for questions, I promise. There are these couple of additional slides at the end of your packet, which I'm not planning on going through individually unless anyone has any specific questions on them, but it gives you some additional, more detailed data on historical information of utility customers. There's that workforce housing development slide in there that talks about what they've done and what they are hoping to do going forward. And there's some more detailed, more detailed tables in there that breaks down the water demand projections by different consumer types in there for those that are curious about that. And then I'll just bring us back here and open it up to,
At 2045. Let's
Yeah.
all reconvene and, you know, I make a lot of predictions too about 20 years or 50 or 100 years. And, you know, they can't really hold my feet to the fire. Well, they can historically. But this is fascinating, actually, and I'm glad in the broader sense that we're having this. Questions from the trustees?
So when we talk to the electric folks, they talk about demand. A lot of time it's even hourly demand and what time of the day, and they talk peak demand and things like that. But water, we tend to talk about just demand per day. But I assume there are daily peaks and valleys, and do we have to plan around that too? I mean,
Yeah.
around water, a lot of water use around a certain time and not others, or?
We tend to really size our infrastructure based on average day and peak day, and then we use the tanks and storage within the system to hit those peak hours. And when you see those fire flows and so forth, that comes from our tankage. So we do need to look at, you know, do we have an adequate storage in our tanks? AE2S did that study that we talked about in our Water 102 about, you know, a couple of the pressure zones that are under capacity for storage tanks. So that's kind of a separate thing from sizing the infrastructure for that peak hour. If you did that, we'd be spending an awful lot of money for really big infrastructure that's not used a whole lot. So it tends to really be driven by the peak day and an average day for sizing the infrastructure and then using the tanks for demand softening.
Others?
What is the current capacity per day?
For our treatment plants,
Today, what can the town produce?
Glacier is 3 MGD rated and Mary's Lake is 4. And then what we'd be looking at for the new plan is in that 4 range expandable, because what we want to do is have 4 actively working treatment trains and then 1 or 2 standby for that extra redundancy, and then expandable in case the uncertainties wind up being something different and we wind up with 7 or 8 MGD. You know, again, it's uncertainties in here that we've got to plan for things to be expandable if needed and have a redundant train. Right now,
So it's
Mary's.
7 right now.
Yeah, but they
maximum.
generally don't run
They
at
don't
the
run
same time.
together. Yeah, I
They can
understand that.
overlap, but they don't generally run.
What's
at
the storage capacity of the town?
Ooh, don't know off the top of my head, sorry. Each plant has 1 MGD and then there's several tanks throughout that I just don't know the numbers off the top of my head.
Okay. I have one more question on my list, probably for you, Travis. When was the last population study that compares with this one and the data that was provided done? Was it Housing Authority Town? Who did the last? Because every population study is a little bit different depending on where it's going and what the objective is. I wonder if you can compare this one.
Yeah, I'd have to look. I suspect there are numbers in the housing needs assessment.
Right.
And then there's visitation numbers in Visit Estes Park's more recent. Those are all based on different sources. I'd have to look further into what other population demands are there. Specifically with regard to water, I don't believe we had an in-depth study in the
2015.
the last master
Yeah,
plan.
I wondered across all of the areas that we look at.
Yeah, and a lot of the things when we looked at the population data before we hired Harvey Economics, we got so confused because each one of them had a different area that they were studying. So the census area is different than the R3, it's different than the housing, it's different than, you know, so everything is different. And you really had to geographically bound our water service area because we care about who we're serving. And what happens outside of that doesn't affect our demand. So it's really hard to correlate different population studies and actually directly compare what they come up with for numbers if you don't have the exact same study area.
While I understand that is true,
Yeah.
this has created some confusion with constituents I've heard from that do watch those numbers and they do watch those studies. And this is different from our Housing Authority study. And so we're getting a different feel for what the future of our community is based on what area and what we look at and how it's crafted. So I think we have to be very conscientious of how we apply these numbers and what we think the future of our community is. Because this is a little different than we've been talking about for years.
Yeah, that raises another question that you brought up. Does this assume that our service area is finite and set and we won't expand?
Yeah, we made that assumption. There's probably areas we can expand into, but there are some, we're in that noise unless there's a massive expansion that happens. You know, we're pretty much limited by how far we can go. We're not going to be able to go to Glen Haven or without major infrastructure,
Okay.
that kind of stuff.
Because
So,
there are some people out there on wells and things, but
yeah.
but
And
it's
then we,
small enough, it's not significant to make a
no,
difference.
and we looked at, those undeveloped parcels and said, well, what would happen? Not all of them will develop, and not all of them will develop the same way. And so, again, there's some vacant land, and Susan accounted for that in the projections of looking at what happens in the future. But we did not assume we were going to add a massive new area to the water distribution system. If we do, that's where that expandability in the plant would come in.
Excellent stuff. Susan and Ed, thanks for helping us out here. Jackie, always thanks for all the expertise. I think we're good.
Thank you. And see, it wasn't dry at all. Thank you very much.
It is. That's interesting stuff, despite the onerous titles. Okay. Trustee and administrator, future study session agenda items. Travis, I'll give it to you first.
Mayor, I have two, one of which is sort of a modification and a contingent modification on the business use of golf carts on trails. As you all know, the town board tonight will consider whether or not to sunset the Transportation Advisory Board. One of the items that board was in the process of working on was collecting feedback, or it was heading down the path of collecting feedback on business use of carts on trails. Expressed opinions have been that can come directly to the board, so wanting to know if you all would be okay with us including, there's 2 or 3 business owners that we've been in contact with that wanted to share their stories, and if you all were okay with us including that in a broader business use of golf carts on trails study session coming up.
Yeah.
And then the other one is an update to Policy 208, which is the naming of town-owned parks, open spaces, and facilities. There's a number of elements in that policy that refer to the Parks Advisory Board, which of course is no longer in existence. And there's a couple of other items that we would like to discuss with the board that have come through citizen requests from the community. So we'd like to schedule that one for September 23rd.
Good. I have 2 items that have been citizen stated. You've probably seen them in the public forum, or at least some of those exchanges. And so offering to the board the opportunity to, at a future study session or board report and discussion item, to talk about the bear or wildlife refuse situation. This has been raised specifically by the owner of the KOA, and there was quite a bit of back and forth with town staff and a little bit with myself in regard to this. I committed to bringing this to the board for the potential of additional discussion and ask you if we can do that at a future study session item. Any issues with having that discussion?
I have also heard some interest in that because it has become a bit of a talking point, and there are a lot of businesses that are challenged with that. And so I think that it would be worthy of our conversation, that item specifically, and how code enforcement, that whole, last time we talked about the higher level view of how we enforce things and what that style is. And I can't identify the solution, but I think it's worthy of discussing, giving people the opportunity to have input.
I didn't bring this up last time, did I? I did.
So we,
Well,
right
you know,
now,
you guys, I've been in the woods for 3 days at high altitude, so there you go. Anyway, yeah, and I don't know when we might have that scheduled.
so we have
for-
the Wildlife Protection Ordinance provisions for commercial businesses scheduled for September 9th. We were going to talk roughly about the code enforcement process at that point, but if
Yeah.
there's a desire to have a separate session that's entirely focused on that, we could have that as a separate session.
No, we
It's
can
up to the
keep
board.
it together. Okay, well, gee, I wasted 3 minutes of your valuable time. However, I do have one that we haven't mentioned before, but again, you've probably seen it in the public email forum if you keep track on that. And this relates to the wind signs. And this has been brought forth by Brian George of Scott's Sporting Goods. I think that's the proper name for it. And this also could conceivably fit in our broad discussion of code enforcement. I don't know that we have to keep this as a separate item or whether we could cover it all in that same base.
Mayor, we were anticipating wrapping the code enforcement discussion into the wildlife protection ordinance really as an overview of how we enforce the code, the limitations,
Yes.
and the judgment that's exercised. Certainly, we could talk about that relative to the wind signs code, but I would not want to conflate the wind signs piece and the wildlife protection piece. So I'd suggest if the board wants to discuss wind signs, we have a separate
Yeah.
session to
So on
specifically
behalf
address
of
that
that
one.
citizen merchant, I offer that also to the board for a future study session discussion. Issues?
Is that too narrow? I mean, I've heard other things about other signs enforcement, and is the sign code gonna be part of the, considered in the development code discussions with the public? And,
Well, I'm
because it's
sure
really
it
part of the
will.
sign code.
I'm sure it will.
I've heard about we have some electronic signs that,
But this was actually a discussion or a request as to whether we could amend the current code and not wait 2 more
Yep.
years for the new development code to amend it to permit certain signage that is currently now anti-code.
So do we just have, I mean, I'm not against, discussing this, but what I don't want to get into is every time someone comes up with something that isn't quite fitting their bill, that they need, us to discuss it and maybe revamp something. So has this been an issue with other merchants or other retail or restaurants or
We-
anything? Have we had
Town
other?
administrator could probably answer that
Yeah.
better.
I've heard an additional specific complaint relative sign code enforcement. I know that code enforcement, and this gets sort of into the conversation we'll have at the next wildlife protection ordinance discussion. As we were working on the Scott's sign issue, we were also looking at the rest of the town limits, which are very confusing. You'll notice if you go out south of downtown here, you'll see the tram has flag signs up. People say, well, what about that? It's outside of town limits. So there are a number of businesses that have recently put up and taken down wind signs. The specific businesses that I've heard from personally are Scott's and the greenhouse shop on Riverside, or across the river from Riverside. or
And we
across the
know
river
that
from
there was
Moraine,
a
sorry.
hiatus in enforcement during the loop, that there was a point of time where we were deliberately and publicly not enforcing on some of those items. And to me, bringing this forth, or a couple of these items forth, even at the study session, we can reach a consensus to not take it forward and reach ordinance amendments or whatever. So we do have that ability. But it's significant for at least some of our merchants.
For some perspective on signs, anywhere you look now, there's an open sign or a flashing LED sign, or there's something that is kind of compliant with the code. And tell me if I'm completely wrong, because I've been out of signs for a few years. But before open signs became everywhere, there was a very specific rule that said no neon, no exposed light source. And the town, them at the time for me, the town let that go and then revised the code to allow them because they'd become, I think, so prolific. And there was no way to rein in all the horses that had gotten out of the corral. So now we have wind signs that are popping up. We've been putting it off. It didn't get enforced. It is something that's very popular, trendy, and effective for many businesses. We tell people in the community, business owners especially, well, if you don't like the process, then, initiate something with the town to change the process. If you don't like the rules, change it. So short of a citizen-initiated ordinance, I think that this is a reasonable step, especially with the amount of time and effort that's been put in by a couple of merchants that believe this may make a difference. And I would say as a consumer and having 20 years in signs, they may have a point that this is an effective way to advertise their business. And I keep looking at Travis because he's going to have the best recollection and facts on this. But this seems like a reasonable approach for one of our taxpayers to have this board consider the facts that they're presenting. So I would not discount them just because we can't look at everything. Somebody puts in the effort and makes a case, I think that's our job to listen to the case. So I would be in favor of listening to that specifically.
I think I don't know, this ends up feeling like a little bit of like a battle of the philosophies, because I think we have to be reasonable about what requests we make of staff, how it lends to the strategic plan, all of the things that we are, big picture and big ticket items that we ask our team to take on within their capacity, as well as listening to constituents and honoring their requests to have things looked at or addressed. I share Cindy's concern that if every individual item that comes up that doesn't work for a specific person, business or resident, then how narrow our focus ends up being. So if we're going to agree to talk about this as a town board, I would advocate that we talk about do a refresh of the sign code, as long as that's not too large of a task to ask, not a refresh, but an overview, I should say, of, okay, what are the things that we're talking about that work or don't work versus specifically wind signs, for this specific business or for a couple of businesses. Because I think we'll also hear from residents who think wind signs are tacky and they don't look good for our town. And we can't make a decision just because it works better for one business. We have to think of overall what we want the community to be and look like. So that, I don't know if that increases the ask of staff or not, but I think I totally understand and kind of agree with where Cindy and even maybe Frank was trying to get at too, of like how narrow our focus gets, and we need to be able to listen to constituents and take in that input, but not every single complaint is going to trigger us changing something at the town board level, or even necessarily making it a study session item. So if we wanted to talk sign code higher level, I'd be interested in that. If we wanted to specifically talk about wind signs, I don't know if I'd be totally supportive at this point.
I think the broad discussion of signage is part of the development code, that is over the next year and a half. To me, sometimes these changes are incremental. Sometimes if this is a popular type of signage, it's worth talking about. Again, if we bring this specific item, this narrow item, to a study session, this board has the ability to say, nah, let's not do it. Leave it till the development code. We can easily do that. But I don't see us getting into a full review of the sign code at this point, since the development code is in process anyway.
I don't mind talking about it, and then, we did some, for a business downtown that had some bright lights, and we allowed a historic exception that was totally appropriate, I think, and it looks great down there. Can't remember what one it was. Oh, you remember? But it looks good. It was a good decision. I don't mind having the discussion, but I think we need to be going to this with eyes wide open. Sign codes are a third rail when it comes down to development code, more than a lot of the things that we're going to discuss. And so if we do get into that, we better be ready to have quite a bit of public input, public comment on both sides. We've already had one email from somebody, or was a comment saying we should do away with signs in town. People feel very strongly about that, and there are communities that are very strict about their sign codes. And even in Colorado, when they made the billboard rules, I remember what a change it made in the 70s and the 80s. You could actually see the mountains driving up the interstate and not have to look at a billboard every 10 feet. But just as long as we go into this eyes wide open, this is not going to be just talking about one business that wants to put up a couple signs. There are going to be a lot of people come out of the woodwork, and we need to respect that and take that. It is a third rail.
And so, again, I suggest that we keep this narrow in the discussion.
Mayor, I'm hearing a very quick hit kind of introductory piece for both the sign code overall, what we're doing now relative to the development code, and bending the wind sign piece into it with maybe some really high level options so the board can get a sense of it wants to discuss this further and with a broader process with broader input.
Okay, and Yeah, not urgent. It doesn't have to knock those other things out that you've got on there. Okay, anything else? With that being said, the study session is adjourned. And we will be back for the town board meeting at 7 sharp.